Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to the Gegenpressing podcast. As you've probably already noticed, my name is not Manu Veit. My name is Stefan Bienkowski. Manu is once again travelling, but I am delighted to be joined by the man, the legend, the Gegenpressing OG, Chris Williams. Chris, how you doing?
Stefan, I'm great, thanks. I don't know if I'm much of a legend. Probably more lazy these days, but yeah.
I'm sure you're considered a legend around these parts. I'm glad to have you on the show because last time you were on the show, which was one of the extra pods last week, you would have probably felt a little bit down after that Liverpool result to Real Madrid, but I feel like I've just about peeled you off the ceiling after yesterday's result. This is a Bundesliga podcast, of course it is, but briefly, I'd love to know how you're feeling after that game last night.
Yeah, tenuous link to Jurgen Klopp, of course. Yeah, real good. It was unbelievable. Liverpool have been horrific for the most part of this season. A lot of questions of the manager, not questions about should he stay or should he go, because I don't think anyone's going to ask that, but questions about has he tactically set up well? Is he too reliant on older players? Is he too loyal? Is he going with the right tactics to fit this side? Obviously, they were all blown away yesterday by not just beating United, but smashing them 7-0. That's for anyone who's fully immersed in the German world and unappreciative of English football. It's like the biggest fixture in England, and to beat your rival 7-0 is unbelievable. And there is there's no downside to that at all. I think the only downside there is possibly is that every time Liverpool went and attacked, they scored, which they haven't been able to do this season. It's just a bit frustrating. I was chatting to a mate of mine yesterday. I said, get over all the euphoria. I would rather win 7 games 1-0, but that's just me being a bit pessimistic.
No, I took the game in as well, and it felt like a proper derby. I just loved watching Andy Robertson just rove up and down that wing. It felt to me like nothing had been wrong this whole time. And I spent the whole game thinking, can you imagine if Liverpool just had a team of Andy Robertsons? They'd be unstoppable. But maybe that's just my national bias coming through.
No, he's a great player, and your national bias should flood through because he's a wonderful player.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, we'll get back to the Bundesliga. We've got plenty to talk about, and we will do that right after this break.
This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting this season. Everything from pro and college basketball to UFC, MMA, and more. You always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. With live betting options, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable. BetOnline is truly the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite leagues and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your rewards. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts.
Yeah, so Chris, we usually, as you know, try to kind of go around as many of the houses as we can on this main show every Monday, but it feels to me, and we kind of discussed this before the show, that we had to really kind of narrow in on that big game on Friday night. The Bundesliga finally stuck a decent game on the Friday. We on the previous show, it was becoming a bit of a running joke that they kind of put the stinkers on a Friday night because people were at the pub, people aren't watching or something, but all of a sudden, they stick what I felt was a real kind of season-defining match on a Friday night, and I think it lived up to the billing, to be perfectly honest with you. We're going to try and spend this show kind of really narrowing in on this game because, not to say there weren't kind of consequential matches at the weekend, but this felt like a really important one. It deserves a lot of our time. Let's just take it from the top. What were your kind of reactions to the result? and your overall feelings about the match.
Yeah, I thought it was a great match to watch for a neutral. I think people remember I've got some Borussia Dortmund leanings, so it was a great match to watch. If you just took the score in isolation, you'd think it was pretty much not a straightforward victory. But if you look at when the goals went in, you think, oh, all right, looks like Dortmund had pretty much wrapped that up by the half time. But it's far from that. It was a real interesting game. And one, I think, that underlined Dortmund's credentials this season. I wrote in my FootMob column the back end of last month that this month will be defining for Dortmund because sometimes they can get a bit Dortmundsy. And by that, I mean look like they're going to challenge for a title and then drop really important points. Past few seasons, it's been places like Mainz or Hoffenheim where you'd expect them to win and they've come away with a 1-1 or they've thrown away a lead, or you only have to look back to that Werder Bremen game where they're 2-0 up cruising on the 88th minute and they end up losing. That's the sort of problems that Dortmund have had. But over the last 10 games, Edin Terzic looks like he's turned it round, and we could see that in this game in droves, I think, and that's really, really promising if you're a Dortmund fan. Flip side of that is if you're a Leipzig fan, there's quite a lot to be worried about there.
Yeah, do you know, I found it was such a kind of not frustrating, but a kind of confusing game for me because I've been kind of reading through the kind of stats and underlining numbers this afternoon, and I think it does kind of do a good job. As you said, if you were to look at the result, you look at the fixture, you think, okay, Dortmund kind of stepped up to the mark and kind of did really well there. But I think kind of watching the game itself and looking at the stats, I felt like it was a really interesting match from a Dortmund perspective because, you'd kind of expect Dortmund in these fixtures to kind of go all out, try to take the kind of front foot in this match and be like, we're Dortmund, we're playing, the Westfalenstadion, we're playing in front of the yellow wall, we're the team with the history, we're the team with the prestige, RB Leipzig are just these kind of plastic pretenders, this is obviously the Dortmund point of view, this isn't really my perspective, but and I feel like in previous seasons, maybe under previous coaches, and you could maybe trace this all the way back, of course, to Jurgen Klopp, whose shadow still kind of hangs over this club. There would have been a kind of expectation to go all out in this game. And the thing that really impressed me the most, actually, was that I actually thought Terzic took a very kind of defensive, tactical approach to this game. I think his team kind of sat back quite well, and the way that they set up was kind of well set up to kind of absorb RB Leipzig's pressure, and they did a good job of kind of doing that, and then obviously hitting Leipzig on the break, which they've done a number of times. And I think you could really start. You could definitely kind of start, picking apart certain performances or certain moments in the game, and you could definitely say, Leipzig on another day maybe would have scored here or there, and the result would have been a little different. I mean, I predicted a 2-2 draw for this game, and as you can imagine, I was quite bitterly disappointed that it very nearly came to that on a number of occasions. It didn't really happen, just from my own personal point of view, with my running kind of race with Manu in the preview predictions kind of points tally for the season. But I think on the whole, Dortmund did a good job of playing defensively, exposing Leipzig's kind of main faults in that team. And I thought tactically Terzic actually did a really good job of kind of outplaying Marco Rose. Was that the impression you got from it, or do you think it was just a case of, maybe Leipzig trying to impose themselves on it, just didn't work out in the end?
Well, I thought it's an interesting point because I think you're quite right. Dortmund were really happy in this game to just give over possession to Leipzig at certain parts of the game, and that's not something you necessarily associate with Dortmund being at home. You quite rightly said, that shadow of Jurgen Klopp's gegenpressing heavy metal football as hangs over the club like a millstone pretty much, and that's why coaches after him have tried to come in and have done it to relative degrees of success and also degrees of poorness at times. But I think he very cleverly learned from that game in September where they were battered 3-0, and it was like, okay, you have the ball, see what you can do, and because we're very good on the flanks and we'll just tear you apart. I still think that Dortmund had a little bit of luck, and I say that because Emre Can scored again from distance, like he did against Bochum the other week, which was the world's worst goal I've ever seen from 45 yards.
Yep.
He hits a ball from outside the box, which on another day is easy pickings for any defence. But that little bit of luck got it through, really set them off. Obviously, they had a goal disallowed early as well, which would have hammered their advantage home a lot earlier. But yeah, I thought Terzic was very, very clever. And flip side on that, maybe Marco Rosa tried to be too clever, because if you look how Leipzig have played in the past throughout this season, they've got some really good results with a different formation, and he sort of went back to one that he'd used a couple of times with varying degrees of success, and it didn't work out for him here. But you're quite right, at the end, Timo Werner's got a great chance to draw the game. I think that's around about 95 minutes as well. So it's a brilliant block on the line. I think it was by Schlotterbeck, wasn't it, in the end, who cleared it off the line. But on another day, that goes in. On another day, of course, I think they hammer home, the chances they had. I'm not one for looking at XG in isolation, but for this particular game, the stats will show you that Leipzig should have scored more goals than they did. Unfortunate for them on the day, but really good for the title race. But yeah, I think both coaches will be happy, and I think that if anyone's got anything problems to come away with, obviously it'd be Marco Rosa, because I think he just probably tweaked it a little too much for this particular game.
Yeah, I watched the game, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, but I kept thinking about what you'd said after the I think it must have been the Man City game in the Champions League, where you said it felt as though Leipzig had played a little too defensively in the first half. I think it was you. I'm pretty sure it was you.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. That was the other week where they came out that second half against Manchester City and pretty much blew them away. And if they'd done that, we're going to get onto that in a bit, but if they'd done that for the first half, it's a different game, and maybe he's overthought this because it is such a big game for both clubs. Yeah. And maybe I wouldn't say the occasion got to him, because he's a top-level coach. Obviously, he's coached at Dortmund, he's coached at Gladbach, now at Leipzig, Salzburg. Before he's played Champions League, Europa League coaching. He's not played, he's coached in those competitions. So maybe the occasion didn't get the better of him. But I just feel that he probably tinkered it a bit too much.
Yeah, because I was thinking about that comment during the first half in this game, because it certainly felt to me as though, having just said that Dortmund were happy to give Leipzig the onus in this game, I think the reason that worked in Dortmund's favour is because Leipzig just didn't have anything to offer, really, because Marco Rosa had set his team up so defensively. I kept coming back to this kind of battle between the two fullbacks. I really feel like this is maybe where the match was won and lost for Leipzig, to be honest, because Rosa obviously opts for Halstenberg on the left, who you can maybe argue is a more defensive option, and then he obviously goes for Henrichs on the right, who I think Henrichs certainly has a lot to give when he's going forward, but defensively he's a bit of a liability, and I thought he had a really bad game against Royce and Ryerson, and he just didn't really seem to have any cover from Szoboszlai either. But it was the Halstenberg one on the left that I thought was quite bizarre, because I just think he doesn't really offer anything going forward. And if you kind of look at Leipzig's XG, which I think it depends obviously which website you use, but I used Mark R Stats on Twitter. I think it's very good. I gave him a few shouts out recently, and his kind of XG timeline, which kind of is a way of basically saying, how each team did over the course of 90 minutes and how many chances they created. If you look at half time, Dortmund's kind of running up about a 1.06 XG. Leipzig's maybe about 0.6, 0.5. And, Leipzig then after half time just start going up and up and up. And I don't think it's a coincidence that obviously happens after, Rosa decides to make a change in the 60th minute with David Raum coming on. And I thought he actually looked a lot better since he came on, and I don't know, I feel like that was a real opportunity lost for Leipzig in that regard, in the sense that if they started with David Raum, it really would have maybe offered Leipzig an outball, which they desperately lacked in the first half. Maybe Rosa was expecting Dortmund to kind of go gung-ho, to go all gegenpressing, as you said, and he thought, well, with someone like Halstenberg back there, I can kind of rely a little bit more in, defensively. Obviously, someone like Forsberg, who's now, I would argue, a bit of a water carrier in this Leipzig team. I know he's got a decent shot in him, but I thought he was mostly terrible in this game. And again, he gets the goal, and I guess on paper, people look at the result would think, oh, well, Forsberg must have had a decent game. I thought he was utterly useless in the final third, to be perfectly honest with you. And the goal he scores is basically David Raum putting on a plate for him about a yard out. But I felt to me as though both teams tried, like you said, it's almost as if Marco Rosa's tried to maybe not even second guess Dortmund. He's just trying to assume that they'd take the game to Leipzig, and they didn't. And it meant Leipzig were all out of ideas. And just to kind of finish that point, I think another huge issue here was Christopher Nkunku, who looked anything but fit in this match. I think leading up to the game, I'm not sure how much ahead of time it was, but obviously Timo Werner had been ruled out with an illness, and maybe I think maybe going into the game, Christopher Nkunku wasn't expected to start. He comes into a starting position, and there were at least 2 or 3 opportunities in that first half where he actually found space and time behind the Dortmund backline, and instead of kind of just taking that touch and hitting it away straight away, or just hitting the shot with his first touch, he takes a couple of extra touches and he lets people like Sula, Schlotterbeck, or whoever else to get in there and stop him. And we're talking about fine margins here, obviously, but that's just kind of the nature of a game of this quality. And it felt to me as though, whether it be tactics or even personnel, it felt to me that Leipzig just kind of came up short in this game.
Yeah, I think Nkunku didn't look 100%. Obviously, he picks up that early yellow card after a quarter of an hour, which can sort of be a little bit of a downer to any player, because they've got to play with that on their mind for a good 3/4 of the match left. And then obviously him and Schlager have been ruled out of the Champions League game on Monday as we record this. So I think if he wasn't 100%, he's certainly now obviously not 100% because he's going to be out for a few weeks by the look of it. But yeah, and obviously Timo Werner has come back and he's done okay at times. Maybe he's just struggling Rosa's struggling for that right area up front. I was surprised that they went with that bank of 4 in the middle, because I think with the players that Dortmund have got, especially when they play that central 3, they can find all the passing lanes that they require out wide. Whether they have to go back to the 2 full-backs to go forward, but they will find those spaces in between the lines. And for just to play pretty much a straight 4, or 2 banks of straight 4, I found odd. And maybe that was the defensive issues that before they could do anything about it. They're 2-0 down pretty much, aren't they? Well, they are 2-0 down by the time they go in at half-time, by the time we can chat about it and maybe change it a little bit. The game's probably out of their reach. But yeah, you're quite right. When Raum comes on, I think it does change quite a bit the way that Leipzig play. Obviously, he's responsible for pretty much the goal, isn't he? You said that Forsberg's only tapped it in. But it was his adventure and his initiative and his forward thinking and his want to try and attack, which I think was missing for that first half. I mean, all Leipzig did during that first half was pick up yellow cards. So there's not really much you can take away from that. Is disappointing for them, and maybe just a reflection on their season where could have done a lot better if they just started differently. Difficult one for them because at times it's worked for them, and obviously times it hasn't worked for them. They hit that lovely patch of form round about October, which pretty much took them to late January. Obviously, bearing in mind the winter break, we had the break for the World Cup, but I did pick up a good number of points there. And that was with a similar formation. But Rosa tweaked it a little bit against Wolfsburg, who, a hit and miss side. But I thought that it worked really well for them just to play with that holding 2, then a bank of 3, and then the one in front, which would be Silva. And that worked wonders for them in the game against Dortmund earlier on in the season in September when they won 3-0. It was a similar sort of setup then, just to go back to that more, trusted bank of 2, because it's worked well against maybe some sides where they're looking to win anyway. So they picked up a ruck of goals against Schalke, beat them 6-1, then beat Stuttgart 2-1 with that formation and with that style of play. But they're two very poor sides. They obviously have beat Dortmund convincingly, got a good result against Bayern with a certain particular way. And it all comes from those two holding midfielders, which he didn't particularly think was a necessity against Dortmund. And maybe it's come back to bite them. I'll be really interested to see, maybe not the game against Manchester City, but certainly the upcoming game against Gladbach, if he reverts back to that 4-2-3-1, which has maybe been a little bit better against sides who like to play a bit more football.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting that you kind of hone in that midfield thing, because it's an issue that has kind of flown under the radar for Leipzig this season. You know, even if you just think about maybe someone like Konrad Laimer in that team, it probably makes a big difference in this game. And you know, it's interesting because I've spent much of this season, and Manu's obviously the same, kind of praising this Leipzig squad for having a huge amount of depth, but it certainly feels to me like it's beginning to kind of creak at the sides now. In terms of just looking across that pitch, you know, I thought Leipzig did really well in the fixture before this, going into it, where they beat Frankfurt with what was a lot of kind of, shall we say, kind of B team players. You know, your Poulsens, your Forsbergs, for example. And I think, I remember at the time I thought that's quite a good reflection on Leipzig. I think now it's probably more of a reflection on Frankfurt, where they were at that point in time, because I think this match maybe did a good job of exposing just how much a drop-off there is for Leipzig if Nkunku's not fit, if David Raum doesn't start, you know, if they're having to kind of turn to Forsberg to fill in, and like you said, you know, if they are kind of relying on Hidara and Schlager, who I think are barely good players, and they're kind of maybe, I wouldn't go so far as to say they're top players. You know, I've always kind of been a little kind of miffed when Hidara does get linked with big moves to the Premier League, because I'm not entirely sure if he's shown that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that defence is something that did kind of trouble me, to be perfectly honest with you. Obviously, with that Manchester City game coming up, where, you know, you kind of watch, obviously Guardiola's a top class player, but just about every other player in that back four really struggled. I thought Orban actually was particularly poor, to be perfectly honest with you. Who has done a good job of obviously playing there. He's obviously been quite a servant for Leipzig going back, and you know, obviously when there's a bit of, obviously they lost two big players in Upamecano and Konate, and Orban and Guardiola were able to kind of form a partnership there that has, you know, solved that problem. But gosh, I thought he began to kind of look his age in this match. He was out of position for a lot of it. He really struggled against Haller at times. But you know, there's a few points I want to bring up about Dortmund, but before we do, maybe it'd be worth just kind of wrapping up the Leipzig analysis, but just kind of looking ahead to the kind of games that they've got coming up. So obviously this weekend they've got Gladbach at home. Then the following week they obviously have that all-important Champions League tie. Then they play Bochum and Mainz. Then they have that big Pokal game against Dortmund. And, you know, it would be typical of us to kind of weave these narratives that maybe don't exist and to say, you know, everything's make or break. But it does kind of feel to me a wee bit like Leipzig's season does kind of hang on by a thread here, in the sense that you could maybe argue, maybe not so much that they're out of the title race, or, you know, that so much the conversation as much as maybe a team like Dortmund or Union are part of it, but they've been kind of pushed to the side to a large extent. They then come up against a very difficult Champions League tie against Manchester City, which could see them get knocked out of Europe. And in a few weeks' time, or actually just under a month's time, they have to play this Dortmund team again in the Pokal, and if they lose that match, there's actually very little left for them to play for, except for maybe a top four place.
Yeah, you're quite right. I think when we spoke the other week, we spoke, is it right time for like a team like Frankfurt to dip out of Europe? And is it right at this particular point in time for Leipzig to maybe drop out of a competition? And if you're going to choose one, you'd obviously choose the one that you've got the least chance of winning. And I do think that is the Champions League. I don't think they're anywhere near the level that are required to win that competition. Great result against Manchester City. I think if the tie was flipped, that's an away result, 1-1, then obviously get back to Red Bull Arena and you've got a real big chance. I think it'd probably be too much for them. The Pokal game, it's a quarter-final game. I'm sure they'll want to win that, because then you're pretty much staring at a game in Berlin, pretty much to be able to go and win that trophy. And then if they can win that trophy and finish fourth, I think that's a pretty good season for them. But they have got a defining few weeks coming up, because you would expect them to beat Bochum, Mainz, Hertha, Augsburg. You'd think their next biggish challenge domestically, in the Bundesliga at least, would come in late April against Leverkusen, and then they've got one maybe less game to think about, which would be second to last against Bayern. They're the two testing matches that I think would be on their mind. The rest of the fixtures they've got up to match day 34, they should be winning for a team like Leipzig, for the squad they've got. But it's one that, for me, what would you rather do? I think they have to qualify for the Champions League. For them to get to the last 16 where they are at the moment is probably about right. So I don't think they would. I don't think I don't think they're worthy of a round further. I don't think they've got the ability to go around further. If they get there, obviously brilliant, but I think that's where they would stop. It's all about being in the Champions League consistently. And I think if they fall out of the Champions League, they've got a better chance of qualifying for it next year. But it's really interesting that you mentioned Orban there, and is he getting a little bit older? Leipzig have to, if they want to become a serious club, they have to keep hold of players like Konate and Upamecano, because Bayern, Dortmund to an extent, they let their players go when they want. Leipzig still have this model where they get players in and they sell them for big money, and they get players in, they sell them for big money, and get players in, they sell them for big money. At some point, that's great. But it needs to stop if you want to become serious at running a title challenge, because Bayern certainly don't do that. And that's the team that have won it for the last 10 years on the trot. And that's the sort of level that you got to try and beat year in, year out. So yeah, there's a few questions I think Leipzig have to ask of themselves. But yeah, it'll all be about getting in the Champions League for them next year. That's where the money is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I just kind of thought, looking at that back line, that, there's all this talk about Guardiola leaving, and I'm kind of led to believe that he's not suspected to leave this summer. It'd probably be next year. But if you were to take Guardiola out of that team in a couple of months' time, or that back line in a couple of months' time, suddenly that team looked very frail at the back. Because, I know they have signed I think he's even a young Croatian player, Manu would know better than I about this, who could kind of step in. And you could argue that, at the time when they sold Konate and Upamecano, that there were concerns over who would fit in where, and then Guardiola suddenly plopped out of nowhere. And I know Leipzig are very good at that, but as you said there, there's only so many times you can rely on that constant conveyor belt of talent to kind of keep paving over the cracks. And I think it'd be fine if it's a solid back four and one player's moving on and our player's stepping in, but it looks to me like at the moment that back line's kind of hanging off of Guardiola, because you can even look behind him at the goalkeeping situation where, yeah, Golaski's missing and they've kind of got Blasvich in there, but it's not as if Golaski was really a world beater when he did get moved, or when he was sidelined with an injury. So big problems there. And yeah, I guess we'll just have to kind of see what happens with Leipzig. I guess if I was kind of trying to put a kind of more positive note on it, you could really argue that this was a game in which Leipzig were really dogged by injury, illness, whatever else you want to look at. And maybe Man City will knock them out of the Champions League next week, but you'd like to think by the time they do play Dortmund again in the Pokal, and Kuku will be kind of back fit. They'd obviously have Leimer back. Dani Olmo is expected to come back at some point as well. And Timo Werner would probably be fighting fit by that point as well. So they are missing big players, so I guess they can kind of excuse this performance to one extent or another. But one thing I did kind of want to narrow in on from a Dortmund point of view, and this is really to just kind of pull myself up for this, because Manu and I we've been kind of treating Terzic's appointment at Dortmund with some sort of not bewilderment, but I think when he was appointed, it kind of raised a few eyebrows, and there were question marks over whether this novice head coach knew what he was doing. And I think it's time we really kind of have to give him his due here, in terms of the performance that Dortmund have obviously put on, but also just kind of the way that they have been playing. Defensively, they've been very impressive. And I think to kind of go back to the kind of tactical discussion, I'm just so impressed with the way that, I don't think it's a surprise that Dortmund have managed to kind of really turn things around in terms of results by, if you kind of look at key kind of players in this team who, under previous head coaches, under previous seasons, were very average, very bog standard squad players. The three ones that stood out to me on Saturday, obviously Emre Can, who, has kind of managed to I don't want to say redefine himself because he's always been this player, but he's managed to kind of find this new lease of life. Maybe it's down to injury that he's just managed to pull himself back to fitness. He's been maybe nursing injury for the last 12 months or something, but he's suddenly kind of very comfortable playing as that kind of defence midfielder that kind of slots in almost as a third centre back. It seems to be helping Sula and Schlotterbeck a lot. Marius Wolf suddenly looks like, a right wing back ready to take on the world. And then, of course, perhaps most notably, there's Julian Brandt, who was cutting about this pitch on Friday, Chris, playing like Zidane.
Yeah. I think Edin Terzic does deserve a lot of credit. Obviously, when he came in originally after Favre was sacked, there was a few eyes raised, but he did what he needed to do, didn't he? And they kept him around deliberately just in case Marco Rose didn't work out, which I thought was very strange. That whole appointment at the back end of that season and the issues of poaching him from Gladbach, and it just didn't work for them. And you only have to look at the managers they've had since Klopp has left and since they've been trying to chase that way of playing. Thomas Tuchel, I would argue, was probably the best they'd had, but they, the board couldn't get on with him, so he was sent. Bosch came in, was a nightmare. Stoger was just, I don't know, still to this day, don't know why Dortmund ever appointed Peter Stoger. I do know because they were after Lucien Favre and he wasn't available, so they went with Peter Stoger. But that was just such a terrible time for Dortmund. And then Favre came in and was a flop pretty much. And then Terzic has come in. He gets the club. He stood on the yellow wall. He's been around all the different stands. He gets the club. He gets the city. He gets the ethos. He is a very, very good fit. And obviously he's a Pokal winner as well. I'm really surprised he wasn't snapped up by a club in the closed window after Marco Rose came in, but I think Dortmund knew what they were doing. I don't think Watzke and Zorc wanted to let him go because I still believe they thought, even though they'd hired Marco Rose, it was probably a mistake after they'd seen what Edin Terzic could do. And now he's had that consistency. He's had 33 matches now. He's starting to get to know his squad. He's starting to get to know the way that he likes to play football, the way that he wants to set up. They're on the best run of form, I think, for years, aren't they, at the minute? 10 wins on the bounce. They've broken a couple of Opta records for Dortmund. And yeah, it can't be argued that it's not gone the way they want this season. Obviously, they desperately need a title. That's why, they had all the managers before that I've just spoke about, is they're on that constant lookout to not buying off their perch again, which they haven't done for a very long time now. But I think Edin Terzic looks like the man who, if they trust in him and they don't sell all his best players every season, or if they do, it's one at a time and they can replace, he'll probably have a good go at doing that. I think Dortmund have learned in the past that you can't sell your best all the time, and you need to keep hold of some. They're very good at only letting Sancho go when they wanted. Pretty much the same with Bellingham as well, who you would expect to go in the summer. But he'll be a hole that'll be need to fill. But Dortmund, I don't really think when they've got rid of a player, you've missed them. And when we chatted last time, okay, Erling Haaland's gone, best striker in the world, arguably. But they've just found those goals elsewhere from all around the squad, which I think is more healthier than relying on one person. So, yeah, Edin Terzic, I think he deserves a lot of credit because he's happy to switch it up. He's happy to switch up the way Dortmund play. And this is why I'm a big fan of German football, Stefan, because it's not just constant, I play 4-4-2, get it down, flick the ball on, yada, yada, yada. German coaches do tweak their system in order to fit who they're playing. And that's necessarily a good thing sometimes because you want to play to your own team strength. But I think if you've got that tactical nous and that tactical ability and foresight to say, actually, we're going to play Union Berlin and we're going to go with more of a 3-5-2 flat. But when we play Bayern, we want to go 4-3-3 attacking, and we can also switch up to 4-2-3-1 if we're playing a side like Hertha and we want to grind out a result. I think that's a good indication that you've got yourself a good coach.
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging because, I've often said on this podcast how kind of much I lament the fact that there is a kind of cookie cutter template to being a Bundesliga head coach sometimes. It's, play the same old gegenpressing football. Everyone runs around like headless chickens at times. And I think that sometimes plays into clubs like Bayern's hands in the sense that, as I've kind of said on the show before, if both teams play gegenpressing football as it's supposed to be played, the team with the best players will end up winning, so it can almost sometimes kind of cement the hierarchy of German football to a large extent. But to have Terzic show that he can kind of play a defensive system against a very good team like Leipzig, not only does it bode well for this game itself, where they can kind of they don't mind kind of putting pride to one side, shall we say, and obviously the fans demanding that they kind of take the game or take an attacking approach to the game that would maybe play into Leipzig's hands. I think that really just it shows a huge amount of maturity from Terzic. It shows a huge amount of confidence from him as well, that he feels that he can do that with his Dortmund team. And to maybe kind of transition now to that Chelsea game in midweek, I think it maybe does a really good job in that regard as well, because they go to Stamford Bridge with a very narrow lead, following on from a game that, despite Chelsea's struggles lately, I thought they actually played quite well in, paradoxically, and perhaps should have scored a couple of goals in that game. I think their XG was actually quite high. And, I think Terzic obviously probably thought, right, we have to get through this Leipzig game, win this game, and then we'll see what happens with Chelsea. But maybe he kind of set up this Dortmund team thinking, well, it suits us to play this way against Leipzig in this particular case, but it's probably also a very good tactic to take to Stamford Bridge.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, Gregor Kobel had a superb game in this first leg, which is probably why the back line wasn't breached. But I think Dortmund have set themselves up now to go to Chelsea, who have been really poor on the whole. I know they got a good result on the weekend, but they beat a very, very poor Leeds side who are fighting relegation. And Chelsea themselves are 10th. They've lost way too many games. They've had an inability to score. I mean, the last time I watched Chelsea in the Premier League, it looked like 11 individuals out on the pitch. And that's obviously no good for Graham Potter, but he's had a ton of players parachuted into him, and he's still playing players like Loftus-Cheek, which obviously says to me that these new players he got, he's not been able to gel properly as yet. And I think if you look at that first leg, who they had out, they had João Felix in the middle, and you had Murdoch, who I thought he had a terrible game. Havertz has been quiet, Ziyech as well. That's a quad of players there that should be banging their goals in left, right and centre, and they're not able to do that. And I think Edin Terzic is a very clever coach, and he'll obviously watch this Chelsea side with his data analysts, and they'll be able to eke out every bit of performance. It's interesting for me because previously when they've come across an English club, and the one they played most on occasions most recently has been Tottenham, and I thought they've been naive in them games in the past where they could have actually got a result, and they've been unfairly knocked out of Europe. Well, unfairly is probably a harsh word, but they've been knocked out when they possibly could have won, and they probably could have dumped Tottenham out. I think for this, if they can play it right at Stamford Bridge and they can be tight and they can be compact, then they've got themselves a chance. The only thing I would say is if they hand over the level of possession that they did to Leipzig at times, this Chelsea side, even though they've been playing poorly, will punish them. And I think that's because they're slightly better than Leipzig. But it's going to be a really interesting match. And you would think, and what you said there was really well, is that it's affected the Bundesliga, whereas coaches just want to play this gegenpressing style and go out toe-to-toe. And if you haven't got the best players, you're going to get beaten. And that's a really good thing to put out. So if they go toe-to-toe with Chelsea, and Chelsea have got returning players coming back from injury, and I think they could be in for a long night. But if they play away to frustrate Chelsea and then hit them on the break, or put a good state of possession football together and score a good goal, built up well, which we all know Dortmund can do, they do create a good chance. If they can do that, early, then that Stamford Bridge crowd will be wanting blood, and it'll turn to a very negative arena very quickly, which will play into Dortmund's hands. They've got a really good chance here of the German sides left in. I think they've probably got one of the best chances of going through.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the only real kind of issue I have with the system that they played against Leipzig was that there was such a drop-off in the second half. Not only, I think, because just mentally and psychology, and you can argue as much as you want, about the incentive these players have and how much they want to play for the team and how they're willing to run through walls for Terzic, but I think there's just some psychological fact, and it seems to hit every single player in every league and every team in the world, that if you're 2-0 up at halftime, it's very, very, very hard to...
There's no worse score in football than 2-0.
Exactly. It's an old cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And this Dortmund team just were happy to sit back in that second half, and it almost cost them. I think there's a psychological issue to that there, but I think the other issue as well is that when Terzic did turn to the bench, he was actually quite limited in who he could turn to. I thought poor Anthony Modeste just is not the player he once was, or if he is, he just cannot seem to get going at Dortmund. Moukoko, which is a really interesting side story here, is just the completely forgotten man since Sebastian Haller came back, or finally came into his team, shall we say. And as you said, a better team in Leipzig could have maybe really pushed on and caused a lot of issues there. So I think that's something that Dortmund will have to be aware of, that they can put in a very good defensive performance, but they have to kind of make sure they don't drop off, because that's when Leipzig started racking up the XG. It's when they started getting their chances. It's of course when they got their goal, and when they could have very easily kind of taken a point from this game. And we'll have to kind of see if Chelsea can kind of do that. But yeah, I'm hopeful too. We'll just kind of have to wait and see how they get on. But unless you have anything else to add, Chris, I think we could probably wrap it up there.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's going to be a really interesting game to watch, as all Champions League games are, to be honest, and probably take out the Liverpool-Madrid one because that game's over. But the rest of them, there can be surprises throughout them all. It's a really interesting second leg, last 16.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll have our usual reaction pod to the Champions League games on Wednesday night. That'll be going up then straight after the second rung of games this week. And of course, we'll have our bonus show up this week as well to wrap up the numerous questions we got from our subscribers. We had over 30 questions from subscribers, and we struggled to get through half of them in the first bonus show last week. So Manu and I were back to do that this week, and then of course the previous show will be back. But as you guys may have noticed, Chris was on the main show this week. We're hoping to have him back on more and more in 2023. So Chris, I think I can say on behalf of our listeners, it was great to have you back at the main show, and I guess we'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, it's lovely to be back. Thank you, and look forward to speaking to you both again soon.
Perfect. Well, yeah, until then, as ever, thanks again for everyone who's listening. If you're a subscriber, thank you very much. And even if you're not a subscriber, please do let us like the show, leave a rating and a comment as well if you can. We're definitely going to start trying to do a shout out to people that do leave a nice little description alongside their ratings on Apple Podcasts, whatever you get. Manu and I noticed that it depends on where you are in the world, what kind of reviews you get. So I think in North America, there have been quite a few recent ones that have been very nice, but I think the last one we got in Europe was maybe from like 6 years ago or 5 years ago, and it was someone saying that this podcast was very good for its coverage of Russian football. So if anyone in the UK, Germany, or just wider Europe would like to leave a review that says we actually cover German football pretty well too, I'd really appreciate that. And yeah, we'll give you a shout out on the next show. But until then, thanks for listening, and yeah, we'll speak to you guys soon. Cheers.
In Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.